Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to the Hearthstone Weekly Show. This week we're doing the ace match from Fightnight. It's the fifth match, which was just a money round in the end. The series ended 3-0, 3-1, yeah, 3-1. But anyway, the ace match was StrifeCro and Gnimsh, and it was a sweep, basically. StrifeCro brought in his Druid deck, which I would love to give the link to, but there's so many different versions of it because he edited it so much that you're going to have to look up StrifeCro's Druid and just figure out which version you actually want, because otherwise it'd be about 10-15 deck lists. The version in this series is very close to the Shields Up archetype. That was played in Priest, then was played in Warlock to great success in single elimination MLG tournaments, and StrifeCro adapted it to Druid. The current version is quite different, and I need to close the window. Okay. But yeah, this version is a Shields Up deck, which revolves around things like Ancient Watchers and big minions, and giving taunt with some Fury Protector and Defender of Argus and things like that. It's an interesting deck. It did incredibly well at Fightnight. A lot of people were playing it. It was developed just before then, and in this case it beats 3 different aggro decks, which are still fairly popular, even though the video itself is quite old. It was just aired, but the tournament happened a while ago. So anyway, without further ado, let's get started with game 1, shall we? And I just need to make sure that I've turned the sound off. It's a good thing I remembered to check, because there are commentators and I do not want to be talking over people in a video. Anyway, so let's go. First thing, this hand, the only thing I don't like about this hand is probably the Innervate. I don't like Innervate when you have a bunch of 2-drops. There's not much use to it, especially if you're going second. As for Gnimsh, he mulliganed into the Dark Iron Dwarf, which is a bit of an annoying start for him, especially if he's going first. This hand would be okay if he was going second, but going first it's a bit sketchy. Now I'm expecting we're going to see probably an Ancient Watcher on turn 1 here. We could see Ancient Watcher turn 1 and then turn 2 Shattered, not Shattered, Sun Fury Protector? Yeah, Sun Fury. I remember when Sun Fury gave the entire board taunt instead of just the adjacent. It was actually worse because you couldn't position it properly. That top deck is not amazing. I'm expecting that he really doesn't want to fireball this thing, so yeah, he's not going to be grinding this thing down with his hero power or frostbolting, and it's going to get buffed up. Generally, if you see an Ancient Watcher, you've got 2 options. Either is killing it before it gets buffed, or ignoring it and hoping they don't have the buff. In this case, he does have the buff, so it's going to mess him up a bit. Now, the problem is getting through it. He can Frostbolt it, and it will buff his Mana Worm, and then he can attack through it, and he'll be behind on board position. The other option is Harvest Golem, but Harvest Golem doesn't do much, so it's a bit sketchy. Either way, it's 2 for 1, and you really don't want to get 2 for 1s as an aggro deck, but I think you're going to have to. I think the play would be Frostbolt. He has to kill this thing before it gets buffed. Like, if his opponent goes Innervate Defender, he just loses the game. He has to kill that thing. Okay. So, if I was StrifeCro at this point, I'd feel fairly confident. Now, the 2 options he can go right now are Novice Engineer, see what he draws, and then use Innervates to get whatever he draws out, or Innervate Sylvanas. I think Innervate Sylvanas is better because he's playing a big minion deck, which means that if a Polymorph is wasted on the Sylvanas, it's fine. And he's already done a 2 for 1 and he went second. He could afford to spend the cards. So I think I would definitely go for the Sylvanas. Looks like he's probably going to go for the Novice. Yeah, he's going to go for the Novice. And the funny thing about this is that StrifeCro is a very, very safe player. He doesn't like going all in on things, which is why he didn't do the Sylvanas play. But the odd thing about it is that in this case, it's going to put him ahead because he's got a turn 5 Ysera. But in a lot of cases, it would put him behind because he doesn't have the board position that would really mess him up. I mean, what does Gnimsh do to a Sylvanas? He actually can't deal with a Sylvanas. He'd be taking 5 a turn for a couple of turns and he can't deal with it. So in hindsight, they both have similar outcomes. It just so happens that this outcome's a bit more flashy. Another random thing was the positioning here. The positioning here was actually completely irrelevant, where in most cases you want to be thinking about positioning. The reason he did that was more practice against mages with things like fairy dragons or just positioning against chronocults in general. But in this particular situation, the positioning actually didn't matter because he was going to sacrifice the other two. But it's a good habit to get into, positioning your minions in a certain way that's better against things like Cone of Cold. And for Defender of Argus buffs. Now, this is the reason why a lot of people don't run the full suite of buff creatures anymore. Because it's so difficult to play a buff creature without anything to buff. It just feels horrible and it's not very, very strong. So now we're going to see this turn 5 Ysera, and Gnimsh has almost no way of beating a Ysera at this point. It's almost impossible. The Ysera Awaken StrifeCro got is also incredibly crucial, but at this point it's sort of irrelevant. Now the play here, I would say, is Dark Iron Dwarf and attack. Simply because he's going to use his Ysera to kill the 5-3 or the 4-4. He can't kill both. And if he has a Ysera Awakens, it's a 2-for-1, not a 3-for-1, which is what's probably going to happen here. Yeah, he does, if I recall correctly, he goes for the Fairy Dragon into a Defender. Now, the only reason I really don't like this is because of Ysera Awakens. I mean, I know that as spectators you can see that he has Ysera Awakens, but it's something you have to learn to play against. It's always possible, it's always something that can happen, and in this case he can just go Ysera Awakens into Harvest Golem, and he's so far ahead. And that's what's going to happen. Now, Gnimsh is in an even bigger hole than he was in before, as we see StrifeCro's minions switching. Now, I think he's just going to go Acolyte and then buff his own Acolyte, make it a 3-3. No, he's going to go for the draw. Interesting. I think I would have gone for the Dark Iron, mainly because it chips away at Ysera if he uses that, and also it can trade with a Harvest Golem if he decides to go for the face instead, or just destroy the Dark Iron. Interesting. I think he's trying to go for the burnout plan, but the burnout plan doesn't really work when you're this far behind. He needs double Pyroblast. Yeah, StrifeCro has a habit of talking himself through his plays, which to some, I know some people make fun of it, but to be honest, it's actually a fairly smart thing to do. Because sometimes when you say something to yourself, you realize whether it's a bad play in the end, as opposed to just doing it and thinking about it later. Something else, going for the uproot, that is one of the few times where uproot is better than the 5/10 with Taunt, and the simple reason is he has to kill Gnimsh before Gnimsh has a possibility to burn him out. So what Gnimsh has got here is probably Cone of Cold into Sylvanas, and that's it. He can Cone of Cold, freeze the board, then play Sylvanas, and then hope for a Pyroblast or something, or even a Fireball would do it. Just to burn him out. He needs to Cone of Cold Sylvanas, and then freeze the board next turn and Hero Power an attack. And then the turn after, draw a Pyroblast and Hero Power with it to kill him. That's like his only way of winning. Now, he can't play Ysera Awakens because he will lose his Ysera. So that's a dead card at this point. He could he could naturalize the random thing caught in my throat. Anyway, he could naturalize the Sylvanas, but then he would lose something on his board. If it was a Harvest Golem, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but any of the others would be disastrous. He could also Earthen Ring Farseer, targeting himself. Oh. He's gonna naturalize his own Sylvanas. That's quite funny. It works, but it's kind of hilarious. So his opponent draws 2, he steals the Sylvanas. It's the most elaborate move you could have possibly done there. It does, however, mean that the chance of him dying to the perfect draw is negated. So probably the best play there. Yep, and we did see the Blizzard. So yeah, we may have seen the God top deck win out of nowhere, which it is possible. It's incredibly unlikely, but it is possible. What we might see here is probably just Dark Iron Dwarf targeting anything and then Blizzard. Yeah, I think that's what we're gonna see. Because he still needs to go for the possible but incredibly unlikely win. It's his only option. He's dead on board by far. So he just needs to keep freezing. Anyway, so what we can see from this game is that Mage aggro decks have a serious difficulty dealing with large threats, because a lot of the time they drop Polymorph and hard removal. Some of them are running Tinkmaster now, but they did drop some Polymorphs and some hard removal and silences and things. Yes, it is at 5 mana. Now, the reason for that is, as I said, this was aired yesterday. However, the actual games were recorded just after the last major patch. So when Flame Imp was changed, Shadowed Sun Cleric was changed, Argent Commander was changed, things like that. But the decks themselves are still very similar, at least in this series. It's the main reason I picked this series over some of the other ones, was because in some of the other ones you saw decks like Frozen Giants, which we know aren't viable anymore. It's more sort of mage control that's viable now. Frozen Giants, we saw some of the Warlock aggro decks, which have been designed before the nerfs, so they were running a bit more of the buffs and things, but those haven't been changed that much, so it wasn't as bad. The main thing was with Frozen Giants, but this series doesn't have a Frozen Giant deck in it, and it also showcases 4 decks which are fairly contemporary that are still being played. Okay, that's kind of hilarious, because if you think about it, if he hadn't stolen the Sylvanas, he would have lost the game. It's so absurd. Because he drew exactly what he needed. Cone of Cold into Sylvanas, and then Hero Power into Blizzard, and then Pyroblast Hero Power. It's so absurd. If he hadn't had the steal in the Sylvanas, he actually would have lost in the end, which is kind of hilarious. Because that game looked so lopsided, but there was actually a chance where he could have lost. Also, StrifeCro randomly. They actually filmed all these things for all these players, and Crip was like half asleep, like most of the time. So whenever he has one, it's just him walking about on the screen. It's kind of hilarious. But anyway, so before we move into the second game, if anyone has any questions, I'll give them a minute. But yeah, this is before the freeze nerfs. So 2 mana Frost Novas, 3 mana Kona Colds, 5 mana Blizzards. So yeah, that's why I'm avoiding the Frozen Giant section. I was thinking of doing the 3-0 that Gnimsh accomplished in the first series, I think, against Trump, but it was, one of the decks was against a Frozen Giant deck, and I've already done a weekly on Mage Aggro. It was the first one I did, so I decided to go with StrifeCro, because I haven't done a Druid daily yet. I've done like Mage Aggro, Hunter Burst, a couple of Rogue Cantrip games, and some Warlock Aggro games from King of the Hills. Done a couple. Haven't done Druid yet though. But anyway, if anyone doesn't have any questions, I'm going to move on to the second game, which is Gnimsh switching out his deck because this is BlizzCon format. He switched out to a Warlock Aggro deck. Now, Gnimsh does play 3 aggro decks, which gives him less options, and he is really bad against something like Druid, for example. Gives him less options, however, it is what he's most comfortable with playing, and it is what he plays best. He's not a control player, he's a very good aggro player, and it's what he's known for, it's what he plays with. So he picked 3 aggro decks to take to this. And then someone like Trump picked 3 control decks, which gives him a couple of bad matchups, but it's down to playstyle. So anyway.
Yeah, sick predictions.
Oh, I keep forgetting about the sound. Bye-bye sound. Okay, try again. So, this opening hand, yeah, scripting over to StrifeCro, yeah, he's just getting rid of the large stuff. The Ancient Watcher is okay to keep. He's got a couple of ways of making that live. Gnimsh's hand is incredible. I'm not gonna lie, Gnimsh's hand is insane. He's got turn 1 Flame Imp, Blood Imp, turn 2 Fairy Dragon. That's incredible. It's one of the best opening hands you can get. Not the best, but it's one of the best. Oh, random thing which happened which was quite funny. StrifeCro always mutes his opponent, so Gnimsh always throws out emotes. And in the first game, StrifeCro muted him, and in the second game, he muted him before he said anything. I'm kind of like that. I just mute anyone I play against. But fortunately for me, most of the people I tend to play with don't use emotes continuously. Now, what we might see here is an Ancient Watcher, just to sort of threaten the taunt. We could also see a Novice, but Novice is a bit sketchy, so I don't think we're going to see a Novice. I think we are going to see the Ancient Watcher, just because on turn 4 he can also silence his own Ancient Watcher if he needs to and use it as damage. Yeah, and as we see, if he'd he's yeah, if he'd played the Ancient Watcher, he would have got the trigger on it. It's a risk. I know I'm generally a more risky player than someone like StrifeCro, who's a very controlling player, but it's something you can take a risk on, especially if you're 1-up in a series. 1-up in a series against a Warlock aggro deck, taking a risk that can really mess your opponent up, I think, is worth it sometimes. So, now that draw is just absurd. He can go Harvest Golem and then turn 4 Ancient Watcher, Defender of Argus. That draw is game changing, in fact. Like, it's absolutely game changing. It's not even debatable, it's nuts. A 5/6 with Taunt is almost unkillable with one. It basically is unkillable with one card. Realistically, a Warlock aggro deck will kill that by soul firing it and trading a minion, which is a 3-for-1. I don't care if you have life tap, that's a lot of cards. The bad placement Gnimsh is not. He doesn't do something similar to what StrifeCro does, for example, with placement. Gnimsh tends to use placement whenever it's entirely necessary. StrifeCro and Crip and like Ecop hasn't really got the positioning thing down very well, but even Artosis and such, they tend to do it all the time. Gnimsh only does it when it's relevant. So if you actually watch his games against Trump, he does his positioning flawlessly because he's playing against classes that actually require positioning. He does it absolutely flawlessly and really messes his opponent up. But yeah, it is something to think about. Now the real question is, what's he going to do here? He's thinking about this move a lot. He could Soulfire, but I don't think Soulfiring is the correct one. I think Iron Beak silencing it and then attacking it with the Flame Imp would be the best play here. But he is in fact going to Soulfire it. Interesting. I guess he wants to keep the health on his minions high. I'm not sure about that. Seems a bit greedy. He should definitely kill the Novice Engineer though. He needs to kill the Novice Engineer. He's seen Ancient Watcher combos. He knows that there's a Defender of Argus in this deck. He has to kill the Novice. And he does. This is the advantage of playing a best of. Now, I think it's still Ancient Watcher and then Innervate Defender. The swipe doesn't actually do anything, weirdly enough. It actually would only kill one minion, which is a bit sketchy. So he's most likely going to go for the Ancient Watcher and then Innervate Defender. But this is a bit of a rough turn. However, on the plus side, he is incredibly far ahead in terms of cards. So, if you think about it, Gnimsh is in a situation where he has all of his cards on the board, none of them in his hands. And StrifeCro is in the opposite position, where he has nothing on the board and everything in his hand. So it's a little sketchy. However, this Ancient Watcher is worth a lot. It's one of the most underestimated cards in the game. It can do some serious damage, especially against these aggro decks. But the question is, how is he going to kill it? I think Power Overwhelming is the correct play here because he's so far behind in cards. But it could come back to bite him, considering the Shadow Flame Power Overwhelming combo kills pretty much anything, and you could kill a large board with that alone. So I'm not sure whether it was worth doing it that way. The other thing was trading both minions, but then he loses the game at that point. So the commentators actually do in this game go back and say that he probably shouldn't have done that and probably should have saved the combo. But if you think about it, looking back on it, it looks like he should have saved the combo. Currently he has 3 minions on the board. If he hadn't played the Power Overwhelming, he would have 1 or 2. He would have basically no board position and no cards in his hand. So yeah, it's sketchy either way. Okay, we're gonna see the Hero Power into that and Harvest Golem. His hand is very good. StrifeCro's hand is very good at dealing with this kind of deck. Shattered, interesting. I would say Shattered Sun Cleric targeting the Fairy Dragon could be very good here. He gets blown out by Starfall is the key problem. However, Gnimsh has been watching most of these games, and if I recall correctly, there wasn't a Starfall in this version of StrifeCro's Druid deck, so he's just going to go straight for it. Sunwalker. Sunwalker is an incredible card. Incredible against this kind of deck. he can play Sunwalker, and then Gnimsh has lost the game. There is no way in Gnimsh's deck to effectively kill a Sunwalker. And he doesn't have the correct board position to kill a Sunwalker either. And by taking out that 1-2, he can't ping the Divine Shield. It's just a win-win situation. Now, we could share Shadow Flame to kill this thing, but I don't think it would do anything. Yeah, he can't kill it. He actually can't kill it. That's a big problem. Like, he can't kill it effectively at all. He has to trade his entire board for this thing. He could go Harvest Golem and then Void Walker and just hope for the best. And random minions dancing around. Bug they still haven't fixed. You can trick that bug into working with Defender by hovering the Defender of Argus card above your hero and seeing where it makes the minions move and then leaving it there as opposed to trying to put it on the board, because then it messes it up. So you can sort of trick the bug into working. I wouldn't recommend going for that, although we might see a swipe, and I think that's what he's playing around. That there could be a swipe, so he's just going to go anti-swipe. But then he doesn't attack with anything else. I don't see that as necessary in any way. Like, he's making himself more vulnerable to AoE. Sure, the Sunwalker gets more damaged if he attacks with it, but it just seems a bit sketchy. So, ultimately, however, looking back on that, there wasn't a good play. So, trying to decide what the best thing to do there is kind of almost impossible. And I'm gonna leave that one. Because getting rid of the Divine Shield, you start wearing down the Sunwalker, but then you make your board more vulnerable to AoE. But then you've seen that StrifeCro doesn't play Starfall, so meh. It's just weird. Now, there's a couple of plays we could see here. We could see an Ancient of Lore drawing 2. We could see a swipe. We could... I think a swipe would actually be a very good one. Druid of Cloakdos would be a good one. Okay, we're gonna see, is that the draw 2? Yes, that is. I don't tend to play Druid, so I know what the cards do, but I don't know the actual choose one order thing, which is very confusing when playing Arena, because I have to read every single time. An Ancient of War is backwards. All the other defensive ones are where the offensive one for Ancient of War is. That has caused me a couple of games. It's just a minor thing, but it's kind of irritating. Now, we could see a Shadow Flame here. A Shadow Flame would really do some work. I think Shadow Flame Harvest Golem. Oh, there's the Blood Knight he needed a couple of turns ago. I think we're gonna have to see Shadow Flame. He can't pass up this opportunity to Shadow Flame. But then, oh yeah, he can't target it. Yeah, he can't target it. That was me dropping the ball for once. Wow. Yeesh. Yeah, and he also forgot he can't target it. You don't think about it, because Fairy Dragon, the way the ability works, where you can't target it with spells but you can with abilities, is actually very confusing. I've noticed this happens a lot more often than you'd think, that people forget that you can't target Fairy Dragon with your own spells. The only reason that's confusing is because of the way stealth works. If you ever played with stealth minions, you can target your own stealth with cards, but your opponent can't, so it does get a bit confusing. But yeah, that was kind of hilarious. My mistake. Anyway, so here we've got a couple of plays. I think Keeper of the Grove silencing one of the Harvest Golems is probably the best play. We could Keeper of the Grove to silence a Harvest Golem and then kill the Harvest Golem, or just go straight for the face and deal 6. Swipe is not really that playable. We could also see Innervate Druid of the Claw. That's another possibility. Interesting. Is he really going to go for the Sunfury Protector? That confuses me. I think that was the weakest play he could have done there, actually, apart from Swipe. I think Keeper of the Grove silencing a Harvest Golem and Innervate Innervate Sunfury could have been better. That was a sketchy play. Whatever. Anyway, at this point though, Gnimsh just lost this game. He's too far behind. He lost his momentum, and this is when the commentators were saying that he should have saved the. Yeah, it's freaking out. What is with that bug? Anyway, this is when the commentators were saying that he should have saved the Shadow Flame combo with Power Overwhelming, but realistically, he couldn't. Like, he couldn't save the Power Overwhelming combo. He actually needed to use it at the time. So, yeah, as I said, in hindsight, it was better to keep Power Overwhelming, but at the time, it was the worst play. And you can't always predict that far ahead, as in 5 or 6 turns ahead. But yeah, now he's dead. Like, we're just gonna see Innervate into Hero Power, and he's dead to a Keeper. So, what did we learn about this game? First of all, we've learned again that this particular Druid deck is a very, very good pick against aggro decks. It's completely flattened 2 aggro decks, 2 of the most powerful aggro decks in the format, and it's what it's very good at. It's also reasonable against control. These kinds of Druid decks play the control deck against the aggro decks, and they play the aggro deck against the control decks, because they're much more of a mid-range, late-game beatdown type deck. That's probably the closest you could go to it. These mid-range to late-game decks, these later end of the mid-range decks, they're closer to beatdown than they are actually to full-on mid-range. They are very good in both matchups depending on the speed of the deck. The things they do have issues with are actual beatdown decks. Actual beatdown decks are incredibly difficult for Druids to deal with because they have no decent way of dealing with it. That's why there's Naturalize in these decks, because they can't deal with big stuff. Things like Ragnaros are very difficult for them to deal with. But when it comes to aggro decks and control decks, they have an advantage. Some of the matchups they have slight issues with are cantrip decks, can do well against them if they don't draw the exact cards they need. Later mid-range decks like Shaman can do well against them because they have slightly bigger stuff for a lot of the game, things like that. And the other thing we learned was that you can't target a Fairy Dragon with a Shadow Flame. I haven't made a mistake like that on a video in a while. Ah well. Moving on to the third game. Now, the third game was the most interesting one because it was the game that had the most issues with, and I keep having to check that this is the correct one because at the top it says Crip. Now the only reason it says Crip was because Crip's account was borrowed for one of them. It was actually borrowed because he had the cards and StrifeCro didn't, so it's a little confusing. But anyway, let me just turn the light on because it's kind of dark, and then we'll start in the third game. So anyway, now, as I said, this is the game which the Druid deck has the most issues with. It's the Paladin. Now, why was Paladin aggro the best one? As we'll see in the game, it's a couple of different things. Paladins have more ways of punching through large things. They have access to things like Aldor Peacekeeper, Equalities, Truceovers, even Knife Juggler combos with tokens. They have a lot of different options they can use, some of which Gnimsh's deck does, not all. But the point is, they have more utility when it comes to beating through these larger decks. However, they are worse when it comes to closing out a game. They don't have as much burst as the other two aggro decks, but they still have their plus sides. And the other thing is they have access to Tyrion, which is incredible against late game decks. Now, I would send back the Truceover and the Shattered Sun Cleric here. The only reason I would send back the Shattered is because you have a sword. If you don't have the sword, I would keep the Shattered, but he has the sword, so I would send back the Shattered. But if I recall correctly, he doesn't send back the Shattered and he keeps it. It's one of the only things I disagreed with as far as mulliganing goes. Apart from one thing, which was Ecop actually kept a Archmage Antonidas in his opening hand. It was horrific. But most of the mulliganing in this series, set of series, was actually okay. They didn't show StrifeCro's mulliganing, which is slightly annoying. Whereas at BlizzCon, they actually delayed the match so that the commentators could see both sets of mulliganing. Yeah, he could have got greedy there and gone for the Innervate Keeper, but there's no point. It's too vulnerable to things like Truceover. Just go for the hero power. Keep the Keeper for something like a Fairy Dragon. Now, one of the reasons why Sword is so powerful going second is you can actually throw this out on turn 2. Which is ridiculous. Like, a turn 2 Sword can snowball a lot. Like, it's so difficult to deal with a turn 2 Sword. That's all of your aggro minions with +1/+1. Against other aggro decks that are not running oozes, it's incredible. Against Druid, it's powerful, but not as notable. So now we're going to see Harvest Golem. Now, next turn, we could see either a Cleric get a 4/3 plus a 4/5 at that point, Harvest Golem, or we could see another Harvest Golem. The random tips is so distracting. This is something which like the Fight Night stuff tends to do in general, which is put up random tips and information about the players. Anyway, what we could see here, and I think would be the best play, is probably silencing the Harvest Golem and then innervating a hero power, because there really aren't that many other plays. Like, it's not really a 2-for-1. It's sort of a 1.5-for-1, and he's against an aggro deck, so he has card advantage later on. So I think he's just going to go straight for this play. Deals with the first Harvest Golem, which is actually fairly notable. The first one is the hardest one to deal with for the Druid deck, because he doesn't have as many ways of removing 4 HP minions that early, outside of things like Swipe, for example. And even then, Swipe you prefer keeping for later on in the game, so throwing it out early is actually kind of sketchy. But in this particular case, it leaves Gnimsh in a really, really weird position, where he can token Argent Protector, he can go Harvest Golem, and neither of them good. It's sketchy. It really is sketchy. I think the best play is probably Harvest Golem, just to save a charge, especially if he goes for the attack there, which he ended up doing. Which I would say go Harvest Golem. He saves an extra charge. It means he can actually still use double charge or an attack and a buff. So I would go for the Harvest Golem. Yeah, Harvest Golem is debatably overpowered. It's one of the most played 3-drops. It's a bit slower than some of the other 3-drops, but the main reason is 2-drops you have a lot of options. 3-drops not so much. You got like 2 or 3, and then the class ones. So it's just the most value 2-drop killer in the game. kills 2/2 drops, or buffed it can kill some 3 drops, and it's just pretty good. Now, that was interesting. I'm not so sure about this one, because what did that defender accomplish? The actual answer is nothing. That defender accomplished almost nothing. He could have clawed to kill the token anyway, so it was a bit sketchy. I think the correct play was probably trading both into it, playing Earthen Ring, healing his 2/4 back up to full, and then just clawing to kill the Harvest Golem token. So that was a bit of a sketchy play, because the defender literally did nothing, and it probably was better to keep it for late game. Now, a couple of options we could see right now is Sylvanas. We could also see Equality, although Equality would be kind of weird to blow this early. I think Sylvanas is probably the best play, which we are not going to see. He's going to go for the double trade play. Now, there's a major problem with this. It's called swipe. He's so lucky that StrifeCro does not have a swipe right now. If he had a swipe, he would be really bad position. He didn't have it though, so it's okay in the end. But if he'd had the swipe, it would have been miserable. Other thing is that he drew Ancient Watcher, so if he'd kept the defender in his hand and done the play the other way around, he would still have the same board position. However, his 3/5 would be a 2/4, then he could play Ancient Watcher and buff those two, and he would have a way better board than he has now, and he would be on the same amount of health, everything like that. It was just the better play to make. Anyway, I think at this point we could see Argent Commander, we could see Sword into Token, but I think that's the weakest play. I think Sylvanas is probably the strongest play, because he needs a board stopper, and Sylvanas will stop the board. He's thinking about the Sylvanas play, which would make sense. Argent Commander is, again, sketchy, because Wrath into drawing off the Wrath, he could also use his hero power, and it just doesn't get the same job done. Oh, Novice into Harvest Golem would probably be the best play here. Yeah, Harvest Golem. But anyway, this game, the last two games were fairly okay in terms of plays. There was a couple of sketchy things like positioning, even though it didn't particularly matter, but positioning was a bit sketchy, playing order was a little weird. There was a couple of things which weren't that bad because there wasn't a good play in the first place. This game has had a lot of sketchy stuff in it that I've noticed. It's probably to do with how much they've been playing, because both of these players have played 5 games. This is their 6th one. Or in the case of StrifeCro, he's already played 6 games. So yeah, I think it's a lot to do with getting tired from playing continuously in this kind of environment. It does cause you to make a couple of misplays later. It's from fatigue, and I don't mean the card mechanic. But it's from fatigue from playing for so long. You actually do start to make mistakes the longer you play. So it's kind of expected. Now, speaking of weird things, I think not playing Keeper was interesting. He could use the Keeper to silence his Ancient Watcher, make it into an attacker. But he traded some health on his Harvest Golem, so he has to use the Keeper for something else. I think silencing the Ancient Watcher would be the best play, giving himself a 4/5. Yeah, he's gonna go for it. I think that was the best play, but it was also something which is a bit sketchy, because it means you lose some of your potential for surprise Ancient Watcher combos, and also not being able to use the 2 damage on Keeper. But I think it all balances out in the end. Now, what we could see here is, again, Sylvanas, but we're going to see Ancient Watcher getting turned into a 1/5, which is correct. reduces the damage on the board by a lot, and he gets a 4/4. And then we're probably going to see either Argent Squire Defender, which I think is what we're going to see here, or Sylvanas. I think he's saving the Sylvanas for a big minion. He's saving it for an Ancient of War, or Ragnaros, or Ysera, or something like that. Now, the interesting play here is seeing him take out the Harvest Golem and giving his opponent a token, as opposed to buffing his 3/3 to a 4/4. And again, it's kind of debatable. I think I would prefer getting a 4/4, but then just because you might draw a Consecration. But then arguably not letting him get an extra 2 damage out of it is also better. So again, it's one of those gray zone plays, as I like to call them, which are, they're not good or bad, they're just kind of okay. Now here I think we could probably see Hero Power into the 3/3, trade both minions in the middle, and then yeah, but actually he couldn't kill him that way, so it's He could also Defender of Argus in the middle. I think actually, yeah, just the Hero Power and then attack the 3/3 with the Damage Golem and the Novice Engineer, and then Defender between the 2/4 and the 1/5, and then kill the 5/5 and not lose anything. And lose 1 minion as opposed to, I think, all of them. Okay. That was a waste of minions. Interesting. That was odd. Interesting to see him trading out like that. We're gonna see Sylvanas yet? Gnimsh seems to have an anti-Sylvanas appearance in this game. I think token Sylvanas would be the best play. He has to go straight in on the board now. Yeah, I think we're gonna see the 5/5 for 5 come down. Even without the effect, it's still a threat, which is all it has to be at this point. Druid of the Claw. Druid of the Claw is okay, but it doesn't really solve the Sylvanas problem. I think he's going to give it charge and then just kill the Sylvanas off with his Hero Power and then maybe Healing Touch himself. No, he's going to save the Healing Touch for later. I think that's okay. Like, if he had more cards in his hand, I'd probably Healing Touch that turn, just so that you curve out your mana properly, and so you don't, in case you don't have enough mana to play it later. But in this situation, he only will have 3 cards in his hand. He can most likely play all 3 with the Healing Touch included, because one of them is an Innervate, so there's just no point in playing the Healing Touch that early. Some Fury Protector, bit of an awkward thing to draw. So we're just going to see him start negating his Hero Power tokens, and then playing his Sun Fury as a blank 2/3 for 2, which is not bad. 2/3 for 2s are okay. They're not horrible. Yeah, and then Gnimsh will probably take out the 2/3 with his True Silver. But he's going to use the True Silver on something. Interesting. Not entirely sure I agree with that. We're just going to see Token and then Aldor, because he has the equality. He can burst through anything large anyway. I don't agree with attacking. I think there is no point in attacking with the True Silver at all. Now he's lost his removal edge. So yeah, there was no point in using up the second durability. Especially, I mean, it's vulnerable to ooze, but then StrifeCro does not play oozes. And while someone might say, oh, Gnimsh doesn't know that, Gnimsh has seen StrifeCro play about 6 games. This is his 7th game he's watched StrifeCro play in this tournament, so he does know he has no oozes. So yeah, I entirely don't agree with that. Now, what are we going to see here from StrifeCro? He's got some cards. Oh, swipe. That's one hell of a draw. That is one hell of a draw. Drawing swipe. And now Gnimsh has effectively lost the game. I don't see a way back from this, because they're in stalemate at the moment, but StrifeCro has much larger stuff in his deck, so eventually he's going to draw in something large and then just grind his opponent out. I'm going to see a Guardian. Guardian, I think, is the largest thing in his deck, along with Tyrion. They are the largest in terms of health and stat totals and such. But then, yeah, Ragnaros. StrifeCro has larger stuff than Gnimsh does in his deck. Now, he has to probably innervate his healing touch out. At least I think he should, because he needs to start gaining life. He's gonna go for the killing of the 1/1. Interesting. The problem is that if his opponent had a Blessing of Kings in his hand, for example, and then just drew a True Silver, he'd be dead if it didn't hit the Guardian. And we know that he plays True Silvers, but we haven't seen the Paladin deck at all before this time, so he doesn't know whether he plays a Guardian of Kings or not. It's just a small thing, but it's something to think about. He's not playing the Equality, and I think this is just so that Ragnaros doesn't get silenced. He wants to go for the play with Consecration if he eventually draws it. But anyway, this game it's gonna grind out, but StrifeCro is most likely going to win it in the end. True Silver, not as useful as Consecration. Consecration would get him back in this game and maybe even win him the game, but he didn't draw it. He drew a True Silver instead. So anyway, so if there are any questions from these couple of games, put them in chat right now while this game is closing out, because this is probably going to take about a minute and then that'll close out. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. Also, I fear that hashtag Shadowflame Fairy Dragon is going to become a thing. Nothing interesting. He's just going for the win. Would have healing touched himself there at least. And that's GG. Yeah, we're just gonna see second Guardian come out. It's probably gonna get shot down by the Ragnaros. Guardian of Kings is a card which can be good in aggro. Sometimes it's not, which is why a lot of people don't play 2. Some people only play 1 in these aggro decks. I think it's an okay card to play 2 of. It's personal preference. Depends how high your curve is. In the case of Gnimsh's deck, the rest of his curve is so low that I think he can get away with playing double with a Tyrion, because he's not going to draw them as much. It's the equivalent of playing double Pyroblast. It doesn't affect your curve that much if you don't play things like Ragnaros. Which reminds me, at some point I'm going to be doing a daily on, or weekly. I'm so used to calling them dailies from a while ago. But anyway, I'm going to be doing a weekly on the I Hearth You King of the Hill that came out. Probably going to do that at some point. Any decks that come out which are actually interesting, if we see any new ones. At some point, once we get into March, I'm going to be doing a weekly on sort of the history of Hearthstone, or at least my history on Hearthstone. Because at that point, it will have been a year since I started playing Hearthstone, so that's going to be interesting. So yeah, I've got a couple of daily topics I actually want to do. Again with the weekly topics. Let's get this in my head. I've done like 30 of them. I'm still referring to them as like dailies half the time, because I switched my my format from doing the Hearthstone weekly show as tournament recap to splitting them. So I'm kind of used to calling them random stuff. So anyway, there were multiple 3-0s from Fightnight. I don't think I'll do another one from Fightnight because the rest of them were not that interesting if you compare them to our current metagame. Like, we had a rematch between Crip and Artosis, which was kind of hilarious. That was a full best of 5, I do believe. But that's way too long for a weekly. That's like an hour and 45 minutes. No one wants to watch an hour and 45-minute video. I'll put it that way, and I really don't want to talk about an hour and 45 minutes as series. So we had that, and then we also had Gnimsh and Trump, but that involved some decks which don't work anymore because they were nerfed. We had Max or Nyx, depending on how you know him, versus StrifeCro, which was an interesting series. It was okay. I was thinking of doing that one instead of this one, but I decided to go for this one in general because it more features on one deck. We also had Ecomp against Monk, which was incredibly one-sided and was actually painful to watch. So I didn't do that one because there's really nothing to learn from watching that. I must admit that it was not a good series. There was so many misplays, mostly from Ecomp, but there was a lot of misplays, and there was one good game, which was Druid versus Druid. The rest of the games were really painful, so I'm not gonna do that one. But anyway, unless there's people actually ask me to do one of the other Fightnight best of 5s, I'm not going to. Just to let you guys know. Anyway, the video should be going up on YouTube probably tomorrow, unless Twitch eats it as usual. I would love to put a deck list somewhere, but I can't, as I said at the beginning of the show, because the deck has gone through so many iterations. It's ridiculous. Just look up StrifeCro's Druid, and you'll come across the newer versions. The version from this set of videos is quite old. It's more closer assimilated with Shields Up, being the Ancient Watcher, Sunfury, Defender combination. So yeah, this is more of a Shields Up Druid showcase as opposed to StrifeCro's Druid, which is what most people know his current Druid deck as. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and this has been Jotto, signing off.